Well, welcome back to the BCC Recap podcast. My name is Evan.
Oh, sorry. My name is Andrew. Yeah.
Guess we're not quite in that rhythm yet.
Well, it's because we have a guest, so I wasn't sure what was happening.
True.
Yeah.
His name's Andrew. My name's Evan. And today we have a special guest on the pod. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Yeah. Suzanne is our welcoming and first impressions director here. Does that sound right? You've also
You phrased that as a question. Like the inflection was that right?
Because it was a question. You, kind of like me, I feel like both of us have held like 4 or 5 different titles around here over the time we've been here. So
many different titles.
yeah. But you run our welcoming team and kind of have everything first impressions on Sunday morning. So we figured for a hospitality series and for a hospitality sermon, we should have your voice in and have yours. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
This is also Suzanne's first time on a podcast and her first time on the BCC Recap. So also very exciting.
Yay.
Definitely, I don't know. Sent a lot of nice comments to her. So she'll come back. Before we dive in today, the one thing I did want to say is ever since I mentioned music, a lot of you have been asking me about music. It is coming. We could throw some stock music onto the podcast and that would be fine. But I thought it'd be more fun if we actually got somebody to make music and intro music for us. So it is on the way. It is in the works. But yeah, you'll just have to wait a little bit. So we'll do a whole reveal thing with Mills. It'll be fun. So diving into today, Andrew, do you want to share your sermon in 4 words?
Be a hospitable person.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Mine was going to be hospitality matters, do it.
also good. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about your main point and challenge? Maybe specifically kind of the 3 things you called people to this past Sunday for when it comes to hospitality?
Yeah. So today, on Sunday, I tried to give people kind of 3 different ways to at least think about hospitality. And the 3 ways were first to widen the circle, to be inviting people in, and to be just hospitable to people with your posture. And one of the cool things I saw on Sunday was people actually doing that in the foyer, which was kind of neat, like waving people over. And so that was one of the things that we said to do, was to widen the circle. The second one was really to be extra generous with people. And then thirdly was to have a posture of asking open-ended questions where you're listening, that these are ways to be a hospitable person. And that's really what we were just looking at Sunday, that we think, or at least I think, that the world needs more of hospitality and that Christians are actually called directly to practice it. That's not just a gift you have. Some people do have that gift. They're very good with it, but it's actually something also that everybody's called to practice, whether you feel like you have that gift or not. It's just a part of our discipleship.
We're going to change the format a little bit this week because we have Suzanne. Because you all know that the snow kind of screwed up our plans. This week you heard the first hospitality message that was supposed to be in a week or in a series of 3. So the second week we were going to have an interview with Suzanne on Sunday. So we decided to kind of pivot that to here. So we're going to do some questions now before we get into Cut for Time. So on that, when you mentioned hospitality being a gift but we're all called to practice it, why is hospitality a gift and something we're commanded to, and other gifts aren't like that? Are there other examples of those kind of dual things? I can think of some, but what?
Yeah. So
what?
Yeah, what? I do think that there are other examples of that in the Bible, of how we can have special gifting, that people can be, gifted in an area, but it's still something we're all called to practice. The first one that jumps to my mind would be that some people are really, really gifted in evangelism, but we're all called to share Jesus too. Those people then who are especially gifted, they might be the ones who lead it, who help us to grow in it, who share with us how to do it in a better way. But we can't say that we don't practice evangelism just because it's not our personal gift. It's something I think we all need to do as well. So I do think when it comes to certain gifts in the Bible, that there are ones where people can lead, but there are other ones where we're all called to practice it as well. So evangelism for me is the one that kind of jumps right off the top of my head as one of those specific kind of gifts, like hospitality.
Why don't we go into Cut for Time now. Or was there anything this past weekend that you wanted to get into but you didn't have time to?
Well, we really, the cut for time was an entire sermon that kind of ended up getting cut because of the snowstorm and that sort of thing. So there was lots of stuff that we kind of ended up not being able to cover. But the main one that I really did want to cover, at least in the second week, was really how we see God provide for Elijah hospitality, where he shows up with like bread and with water, and that sometimes hospitality is just bringing someone food so that they might feel like loved and cared for. And sometimes all we need is like, I don't know, a meal and a nap, and that's what God does for
That's the
Elijah.
one that got cut?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like one of my favorite Bible stories.
It's one of mine
awesome.
too. Except, so our plan was to do the first Sunday kind of around theology and sort of the foundation. And then the second Sunday to be really, really intensely practical. And I think that story is really, really practical for what you can do. Yeah. Bake some bread for people, bring over a meal, bring over a drink, like just let them have a restful space. And so that's why I was keeping it for the second Sunday. But yeah,
it is like, it's the best because it's just like, there's this whole section of just like, the world is so bad and all of these things are bad. And they're like, here's some food, take a nap, you'll be okay. You talked a bit over the course of your sermon about social media and about like our connectedness as a culture. One of the things that I have talked about a lot with friends is the fact that like we understand that social media is harmful, but it also has this kind of preeminence in our culture as a place of gathering, right? And as a way of connection. The question that I had written down was, if the tools to keep us connected actually keep us lonely, what do we do?
So I would say, actually, I just think that tools can be both harmful and beneficial. I think this is the biblical kind of take on things, that what we see, especially in the Bible, is actually there's times where there is new technology that's developed and it can be good, but it can also be used poorly. And so I think something like this, like texting, email, social media, all these things, they all have good sides to it, but they also all have downsides to them. And so I would say like social media, it's not evil and awful, although sometimes it can be, right? That technology can be used really, really poorly. And I think then what we see in the Bible is that when there is new technology that's developed, is that then there is also new temptations that are developed. So we see this really specifically in Genesis, where they build the Tower of Babel. And as they build it, it actually says that there's new technology that's developed. They learn how to make bricks. And all of a sudden then there's a temptation for them in a new way that they have to learn to handle. And they don't handle it well in that story, in which I think the whole point is to be aware of new technology and how it can be both harmful and helpful. So I think with social media, what we are noticing and knowing is that it's really, really harmful. And we need to lean into, I think, then helpful ways of doing it. And for me, I think that always then does our use of it translate into deeper connections with people. And if it doesn't, then we need to change up how we're using it.
I think that's really helpful, especially for me, because you listed a lot of things that are basically my job. So I'm like, if you hit me with a email, social media, and that is all bad, I'd be like, shoot. But I think in the way that I try and approach social media or new technologies or things like that is a lot about like control and boundary, right? That if I'm using social media to connect with people or to find creativity or to be creative, right? Like all those like more life-giving things, that's one thing. But then when I start to feel the pull of it, and when I start to like, when it starts to dictate things for me, when I feel less in control of the amount of time that I spend on it, when I feel less in control about what kind of emotions it brings up in me or the way that it kind of sways me one way or another, that's a kind of a call to be like, oh, wait, I have to recontextualize how I relate to this. I imagine too, like for both of you, this must be super weird to navigate with young kids and like specifically high school aged kids. Like how do you, what kind of values are you hoping to instill in your kids when it comes to that sort of stuff?
Just make them really busy with other things.
That's actually not a bad. That's actually not a bad point. Make them, or helping them to be busy with the right things, right? Like the healthy things. Yeah.
I guess those boundaries, but it's not ever perfect. That's for sure. It's hard sometimes to navigate that as a parent, and you just kind of hope that they, I don't know, see you. It's also hard because as a parent, we too struggle with being on our phones or, being kind of stuck in, gotta check this, gotta check that, and stuck to our phones. So our kids see that, and then you're like, oh, I gotta be a better model of this.
Yeah, it's different, right? Like I was probably one of the tail end, like years or generations where we were engaging with internet and with the like creation of social media, and our parents didn't know what it was about, right? Like with you guys, it's like now you guys kind of know the horrors, right? And some of the really bad parts about it, and have seen it get worse and have seen the effects of it. Like when I was growing up, like we were in chat rooms all the time and our parents had no idea because there were no safeguards or anything like that. But also like computer time was different, right? Like when I was growing up, like, and you guys too, like you had we had a computer that I had to fight 4 or 5 other people for, right? And that sort of thing. But like, I imagine, just like the access of it. Like even when I talk about having boundaries and control over that and making sure it doesn't harm your relationships and like feed into loneliness, like that is that's getting harder every single day that things keep moving, right? And
so for us and our family, what we like to think through is like guardrails. And guardrails are things like that obviously protect you from going over the edge, and you kind of draw them a little bit closer inwards than you would normally do it. And so for us, when it comes to technology like that, 2 of our guardrails that Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about are that our kids won't have cell phones before high school, like the kind of online ones, and that secondly, there's no social media before age 16. So for us, those are 2 guardrails. You can obviously go past them and you'd still probably be okay, but for us, those are kind of 2 things that we just instituted in our family, just to say, with technology and how it can affect relationships, and especially when your brain is still developing, these are 2 healthy guardrails that at least we think are healthy guardrails that we try to focus on and to follow in our family.
Those are actually 2 that we follow too, but I would never have thought of the guardrails, but that's a good idea. Yeah, those are exactly when the kid graduates from grade 8, they get their first cell phone. Of course, they've had, tablets, different things that they can do, but they never had their own way of contacting people. And then social media too at 16, but it's hard. It's really hard. Like most of my kids, they're probably the only ones in their class that may not have a phone. Before that time, the only ones, it's hard to say no sometimes to the social media, and when all of their friends are on it and they feel left out, and it's just, it's tough.
It's tough, which is why I think it's good to even talk about with other parents and to see if there's other parents who are trying to make the same sort of thing. Like, I'm glad that,
we're not the only ones.
We're not the only, so I can tell, my kids, hey, no, we're not the only family in the world that does this.
Look at this poor family over here too.
My next question was, why did you call a sermon on immigration hospitality based? When I wrote that, I just wrote it as a joke. But before we started recording, we were talking, and maybe we can get into this a little bit, about just the idea that like a sermon on hospitality can feel very like warm and fuzzy. It can feel like, like dinner parties and welcoming people into my home and all that sort of stuff. But that I think if we actually if we take hospitality and welcoming people in as a foundational thing to our faith, that it is a very radical thing and it can radically change things. And so what's your stance on immigration?
So I think that those things are really complex realities. And then the challenge for us as Christians is to say, okay, so here's what the Bible says. Then how do we live this out in our day and age and in our lives? And that gets really messy quickly. And I don't think that's a wrong thing for it to get messy quickly. The Bible gives us some of these great principles to live by. And actually what I should have said when you said, what did I cut for time? What I cut for time was I had a whole section, because I was trying to really do now 2 sermons in one. I had a whole section on how hospitality is actually really hard work. And if we want to practice it as a people, if we want to practice it even as a community, it requires hard work. It's going to require us to be uncomfortable. Like, how uncomfortable would some of the Israelites have felt like when God says in Leviticus, like, welcome the foreigner, because you know what it's like not to be welcomed. Like, that is still really hard work, and it would be awkward. It would be probably misunderstanding at times, and it would have been really difficult. So I think the practice of hospitality is really radical, and it is really hard work. It is about dinner parties, but if it's dinner parties just with people you always like and hang out with, I don't think that's actually like going far enough.
Yeah.
It needs to go further than that. And it puts us out of our comfort zones. And so, and then, how that translates into larger scale things for our country and things like immigration, like that's where a lot of conversation can happen and should happen. But especially when it comes down to our personal lives, it should be hard in some ways. And it should be also uncomfortable in some ways. Otherwise, we probably aren't practicing it like deeply enough.
How does working here in your role do you notice the lens of hospitality you have to have in your work affect what you do outside of Bethany and affects your kind of life day to day outside of work?
Oh, for sure. I think it just makes you aware of, like, all the sort of small interactions you have with people. Also, I mean, people find out you work at a church and you're in charge of first impressions and hospitality and you're a jerk in the line at the grocery store. Not a good matchup, so.
Sorry.
Which is why I like to go on cruises where nobody knows me. No.
That's the second time on this pod somebody's mentioned being a jerk at a grocery store.
Yeah.
You mentioned it 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, I did. Why is that the go-to spot of where you're like, where I'm going to be angry? It's the groceries.
Yeah.
For you also, you said the two places you frequent the most were the grocery store and the library.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, keep going.
No, but it's true. Like what you talked about, like having a posture of hospitality was kind of what I was thinking as, you were both talking, and just that it's not just like we're having a dinner party, I'm going to put on this happy face while I serve everybody, and we're going to be very hospitable in that moment, but it's that it spreads throughout your whole life, right? So whether I might struggle with this a little more, I'm on the road driving and, road rage or whatever, wherever it might be, that you're just, putting others first and sort of being hospitable. Maybe you're noticing somebody randomly, it's not even in the church foyer, but anywhere, that's what I would say. Just notice people, notice something about them. Maybe they're, looking like they're having a hard day, and sometimes all it is just like, hey, do you want to go in front of me in line? Like, you've got that one item, whatever it might be. But I definitely can maybe be a little bit judgy about hospitality when I go to places, and I'm like, you might be at Walmart. Excuse me, can you help me find this item? They're like, oh, it's way over in aisle 63. They couldn't care to walk you there. And I'm like, at Bethany, we would walk you to the place that you need to go. So I definitely, you do have a different lens of how to treat people and how to be hospitable. And it's not always about, buying things or giving things, but just in sort of like the presence that you give people. So
I think that's super good. I'll open this up to you if you want to talk. One of the things that as you were talking, I was reminded of was just about how like those being aware and noticing, I think is a really great spiritual practice of just being like noticing around you. And you've talked before about like these kind of like special moments of time or these like moments where you just feel like I don't know if like serendipity is a good way to put it, or just like there's a Greek word that of course I can't remember either.
Kairos.
Kairos, right? And that like maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that, like about Kairos and maybe the interplay of hospitality in that.
Sure. So that's like Kairos is where there's just really special, meaningful time where there's a chance of perhaps like conversion, of movement, of God's really being really present there, and where time feels not fast, but time feels really full. And I think when we sense that, there is obviously an opportunity at every time to be practicing hospitality, but especially in those moments, it's really important because hospitality, I think, ultimately, it's about having an open posture, an open posture to those around you, an open posture to God and what he might want to do in your life. And so sometimes in a conversation, you can all of a sudden see that there's, it feels special, it feels unique. And that's the time to really be that posture of openness, to ask open-ended questions, to be curious, to listen to people, to seek to be practicing welcoming in tangible ways with our words, our attitudes, our posture, all of that. So I just think whenever there's a moment of specialness, that hospitality needs to be some of our response as well, because otherwise we'll end up closing off, and that won't help that moment to continue or to grow or to be a moment where we find transformative change.
I have two more questions for you before we keep moving on. The first is, be honest, how many did you actually eat?
Oh, of those hamburgers? Oh my gosh. I honestly think we probably did eat as many as that. Well, I don't know what I said. I think I said 5 or 7. I think it might have changed in the services, but
for the record, you said that, and I was like, I'm going to get him a hamburger and I'm going to bring it. But it's like 11 as we record this. I was like, I don't have time. I was like, I felt like a McMuffin wouldn't really do it. You know,
it's not the same. And they were the small, like normal cheeseburgers. We're not talking like McDoubles or the other things. Like they were, just those small ones. You can just, hammer back, and that's probably, it was probably 5 or 7 each. Like that's awesome. We took that seriously, that challenge of eating.
Last question: who is your favorite Hot Ones guest?
Oh. That is an impossibility.
Yeah.
I think my favorite thing is, now I'm going to forget, is the interviewer. He's my favorite.
Sean Evans?
Just
incredible.
How he interviews is awesome. So I think if I have to pick somebody, I'm actually picking the interviewer.
If you've ever seen Shia LaBeouf's
I haven't know.
That's a really interesting one because he's such a weird dude. But he can't stop complimenting the interviewer after every question he asks. So he's just so enamored by how good the questions are that every time he asks, he's like, man, what is this? He's like, this is such a good interview. But yeah, check out Hot Ones. Unless, I think that's fine to endorse. You did from the stage.
Yeah, what was I? Oh, because I was talking about good questions or something. Right. I think that's open-ended questions. Yeah.
So before we move on today, we did want to take a second to let you know today our kind of ad for the podcast is about this podcast. So I want to challenge you, if you're listening to this and you have been listening and have been journeying with us as this gets going, I just invite you to take a minute right now, share it with someone who you know, whether they go to Bethany or they don't, that you think would benefit, that you think would appreciate it, and make sure to like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. All right.
I thought you were going to say volunteer and welcoming.
Oh.
I thought it was the ad.
You want to give a welcoming pitch? Also, volunteer and welcoming. So this past Sunday, like I said, there was the snow disruption 2 weeks ago. So this past Sunday, we were supposed to hear from Suzanne about welcoming and about hospitality and about what her team is doing at Bethany to kind of advance some of those things, both for newcomers and just in the life of our church. So the first question we have for you is, why have a welcoming ministry at Bethany? Why put so much time and effort into this aspect of our church life?
Well, there's many reasons actually why I put so much time and energy into welcoming. And so I'll kind of quickly just go through sort of the reasons. But before we begin, I just have to say that I feel like Andrew maybe read my welcoming handbook because I feel like his sermon, a lot of this might be a repeat.
So what you're saying is his past sermon was plagiarized?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. So yeah.
You two can have a meeting after this. It's fine.
Well, obviously, hospitality is biblical and the Bible says it matters. So, Andrew, when you were talking about how we sometimes see it as a unique gift, that's exactly what I would have said. We see it as a unique gift, but it's actually a biblical mandate that we're actually all supposed to follow. And, and all the verses that you quoted, same thing I would have.
That's awesome.
So, so that's pretty obvious. But secondly, it's just that it's Bethany's heart and mission to be welcoming. And I feel like that has just kind of always been a part of who we are here at Bethany. Mm-hmm. That goes along with our mission statement, if this is still applicable, to be a caring community, growing Christ, loving others, serving a hurting world. So wherever a guest is on their journey when they come to Bethany, we feel like the welcoming ministry can kind of help them take that next step in their faith. And as you always say, Andrew, Bethany exists for those who are not yet here. I don't know if you've said that in a while, but that's just something that, we really believe in welcoming. So whether people come broken, hurting, or lost, we want to welcome everyone to be part of our family here at Bethany. And we do this with our values at the forefront of grace and vulnerability and discipleship. And the ultimate goal of Bethany and the welcoming ministry is to point people to Jesus. And it's our hope that when somebody comes to Bethany for the very first time, that they'll actually realize how much they matter to God because they matter to us. Mm-hmm. And, that can be shown in like small ways. The next reason that I put so much time and energy into this ministry and that it really matters for our church is because first impressions happen quickly. They say that you only have one chance to make a really good first impression. And most guests who come to Bethany for the first time, even if they're church people, they're often feeling fearful, skeptical, anxious, and sort of every little barrier that they encounter can actually just seem like an overwhelming hurdle. And so our job as a welcoming team is to be there to remove those barriers and take it off them and put it on ourselves. The problem is that we have actually less than 10 minutes to do this. The first time guest will decide in the first 7 minutes whether or not they're going to come back. And so that's before, hate to tell you this, before they've heard you speak, Andrew, or maybe they've heard the worship team sing. So where are these first impressions happening? They're actually happening in our foyer, in our cafe, in our parking lot, maybe online before they even come here. So that's why the first impression really, really matters. The next reason is just, I think, an obvious one, is because deep down that we all need to know that we're welcome, loved, and accepted. This is a deep desire for each one of us, and it's not about changing people, but about loving people where they are at and seeing them as God sees them, each one created in his image. And our opportunity within the welcoming ministry is to help meet that longing for those who enter our doors, whether online or in person. And I like the way that Henry Nouwen puts it. He says, hospitality means primarily the creation of free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them a space where change can take place. It's not to bring men and women over to our side, but to offer freedom not disturbed by dividing lines. So two more reasons. Because being welcoming actually doesn't happen accidentally. So what we do in welcoming is actually really well planned and intentional. We want guests to feel that we are expecting them. So we're like a family here at Bethany, but we're a family that's expecting guests. In Greg Atkinson's book, he says, every good host knows hospitality doesn't happen by accident. The meal won't magically appear, or the coffee on Sunday morning. The rooms don't clean themselves. You need a plan and a list of tasks, and hopefully you can share the jobs among several different workers. You need a schedule so everything's ready on time. Welcome means more when it doesn't stop with a mat at the front door. What's true for hospitable homemakers and well-run hotels and restaurants is even more important for local congregations. The hospitality ministry at your church can change the lives of your visitors for eternity. And then lastly, because lives changed for Jesus is our end game. Seeing lives transformed by the gospel as people begin a relationship with Christ and grow in their faith year after year is actually our win in welcoming. The journey of one's spiritual growth may start when that person walks through the doors of our church or maybe clicks on our service online for the first time. And so we as the welcoming ministry just have the chance to come alongside people on that journey. And that is just a real blessing to be a part of.
I really liked what you said there about people realizing how much they matter to God because they matter to us. And I think besides being just incredibly beautiful, and I think just a great representation of what church should be, it really is quite simple, right? That even when we're here, right, at church, that we're called to be a reflection of who Jesus is. So why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like building the welcoming ministry here at Bethany and kind of what your hope was for that and hope is for the ministry as it continues on, and how hospitality might bleed out or might kind of start to influence our congregation and our church life.
Well, they do say that that your welcoming ministry, it really reflects onto the rest of your congregation. So what your culture is in that ministry and who those people are kind of becomes your culture. And I'm like, I feel like, yeah, that's kind of true. But also as you grow in Jesus and through discipleship, right, you hope that hospitality just naturally, grows in your life and is something that's more evident. But in terms of building the ministry, I never knew what I was being thrown into, to be honest. And COVID hit and, came back from I had come back from a conference, actually, the October before COVID, and along with David Fluss, and him and I had gone out. It was somewhere in the States, and it was a conference of like 10 people that were a part of it, and there you actually, sat down and it was like, okay, it's not just sitting there taking in information, but like, how are we actually going to build a ministry of welcoming in our church? So I came home with a plan, presented it to Andrew at the time, and I was pumped. I was excited about the changes, and then COVID hit. And kind of everything, all that we had been built here over the years, really just fell apart. I don't know how else to say it. There was really nothing left of it. And you know what? I really, now looking back, see it. It was a huge opportunity that we had to create something new and unique and different out of it. And as hard as it is to kind of build things from scratch, the right 3 people came alongside of me right from the start when we were allowed back in the building. 3 people, and today we are, well over 100 volunteers and welcoming. So, it's taken a lot of, I guess, determination and resilience and planning and organization, intentionality, and I think what you were asking, Evan, is I love systems. I love that whole end of things, but it's also, I've realized it's, also, with the volunteers you have, is being hospitable to them as well, and sort of modeling that for them, and then bringing alongside leaders who also model that every week for all the welcoming volunteers. And when you build into people, you hope that they'll also, share that with everybody they meet. And so, just kind of, gradually over time, adding more and more leaders and more volunteers, and sort of, training them on various values and things that you are hoping that they'll share. And also our people are just awesome. Like, they're authentic and they're real and they love Jesus, and it shows in all that they do as they volunteer. So to be, in that sense, it's just kind of been, I feel like I've just kind of been the one maybe guiding it, but it's also like they do it. I don't know.
But that guidance is really, really important. I think, like, what I see as Suzanne has built is taking something that was happening at Bethany, but making sure that's going to be happening intentionally every single Sunday. And we're going to make sure that it's going to be led well, and to not take some of the culture here for granted, and instead to really build on it and say, okay, so how do we make sure that this culture of hospitality or welcoming happens in every aspect? And so I just think it's really important what you do and what you bring with that leadership and intentionality, and showing that with your leaders, and showing that really for the rest of our church as how we want to operate. So I think that's really what I saw you bring with it.
Yeah. You should all know that pretty much everyone on staff thinks Suzanne is like a way better leader than they are. So her welcoming team is next level.
Yeah,
they do.
Great.
We all want to grow up to be like
Please
Suzanne.
Don't put that on it.
You can even figure out my wife's schedule and make it happen so she can serve. So yes, yeah.
I love you, Krista.
I was going to say, if you can coordinate not one but multiple of the Mills' schedules to get them serving, that is next level leadership.
Yeah.
I will take that. Yeah.
So speaking of the plan that you had, that you kind of came up with, and how it started to kind of take shape in our community, how do you practically live out hospitality, and how does your ministry practically practice hospitality in our welcoming ministry?
Yeah, so we have a number of sort of like guiding principles, I guess, that help us in all that we do. So, they kind of, everything that we put forward, we feel like it has to kind of fall in one of these categories. But the first one, and I kind of talked about this a little bit already, but is that we expect guests. We're not like, ooh, we're surprised that there's new people here. Like, we are actually expecting them. We're praying for them to come. So we just make sure, our foyer, our website, and Evan, this is your job at social media, right? That it's sort of like our digital front door, that they're guest friendly. And I think Evan and I are going to be working on some more things in the future about, enhancing that. shortly. But also, we encourage people to invite others with our invitation goal this year, right? Like that's a huge thing. And just being ready to receive people. I think a lot of churches can be just really surprised by new people, but we want them to show like we're ready for you. So when you drive in the parking lot for that very first time, like the sign says, if it's your first time here, we want to help you find a spot. Then we have people who are going to walk you into the welcome center, and we're going to get your kids all checked in and signed in. So it's just, intentional in how we do that. So we are expecting you. And it's always better to be an expected guest, I think, to somebody's home than unexpected. The second thing is exceeding expectations. So we're not going to kill ourselves over it, but we want to go above and beyond to welcome our guests. We want to treat guests as if they're guests in our own home. So we try to have like really good coffee. I think for our church coffee, it's pretty good. I've had some compliments. Maybe Evan doesn't agree because he's a coffee connoisseur, but
I'm definitely drinking the church coffee right now.
Yeah,
for sure.
We
no, I actually like it too. I drink it quite often.
Clean bathrooms. We go above and beyond in our service. So we sort of add like that personal touch to things. Like when you come for the first time, we aren't going to point you to where the classrooms are your kids need to go. Like we're going to walk you there and explain things to you, and show you, your kids are going to be safe here, and introduce you to the kids' leaders, sort of those special things. And then one other thing that I kind of always mention to my volunteers, when you have somebody over at your house, when they go to leave at the end of the night, you're not going to sit on your couch with your feet up and be like, okay, bye, see you later. Let yourselves out. No, as people are leaving the church too, we want our greeters to say goodbye at the door and to, have a great day, and sort of that final wrap up of, your time together. And then thirdly, we always want to remove barriers. So we sort of identify and eliminate any things that might stop people from returning or getting connected. So I actually ask all of our new folks, a little evaluation, like, how did your first time go? Is there anything we could have done better for you? And I actually really take those things to heart and try to, if there are things that we can change, sort of take those things and make the changes we can. Maybe it's bad signage. Maybe we just need to direct people better. Maybe it's unfriendly volunteers. It can be just really simple things that can affect somebody, wanting to come back again. Fourth thing, respect boundaries. We just really want our welcoming volunteers to have really good emotional intelligence. And I talk about this with them sometimes. So it's like, pay attention to body language and individual responses. Not everybody is going to necessarily want to be seen and heard. Some people just kind of want to sneak in those first couple times and maybe hide up in the balcony and then leave. And that's okay. And we have to respect that. We provide opportunities for people, and then we await response. We're not there to nag you. This is just a really huge thing, respecting boundaries, I think. It's just kind of being aware of maybe how others are feeling. And then the last thing is just encouraging connection. It's great to have first-time guests, but unless we sort of provide opportunities for connection, those guests will not become second-time guests or long-term attenders. We need to encourage people to create new habits in their faith journey, and it takes time and relationship building. So I actually have like a 6-week follow-up process with new guests. And the reason that it's 6 weeks is actually not just like, I'm going to do it for 6 weeks. They say it takes 6 weeks to break a habit. And so, we follow up. We will call our new folks. I'll send them a prayer card. I also, send texts. I invite them to things. And so for those 6 weeks, we're really trying to have them, help them create new habits of coming to church, and to just remind them, like, we're here for you. We want to hear from you. Your voice matters, that kind of thing. And so, just how important providing those opportunities for connection are. So,
yeah. As I hear you talk through the kind of those, how you practice this and what you're doing for newcomers, the main thing really is just that if you are a new person who's coming to Bethany, I think you encounter just a lot of care and intentionality through that entire process, right? Like even in the stuff that feels practical or feels like systems, like you were saying, or those sort of things, that there's actually like care and attention and intentionality built into those things too, and that like those are also ways that we reflect Jesus. Absolutely. Right? And the love of Jesus.
Yeah. Even in like when I think about our cafe, you know, we serve the coffee to people instead of just go help yourselves. Like there's a reason why, you know, maybe you find it annoying. I'm like, I just want to get my own coffee, but no, we're actually there because we want to make that connection with you and say, hey, how's it going this morning? Right. Sometimes that's all it is to start a conversation is, you know, making eye contact with someone and you ask a question and then they're joining your home church or whatever it might be. Right. So yeah, it's really it's very small tweaks that you can make, to show people that you care. And, because we have such great volunteers, honestly, they make it easy because they do care. And, you can just tell.
I sometimes think that Suzanne's role is to make it hard for someone to come to Bethany without being welcomed. Right? Like to make it like, no, like, yeah, we're going to make sure that there's people welcoming you and saying hi to you and all that sort of stuff. So at least everybody gets a personal interaction. And I think that's a beautiful and a needed thing. And
I know it's like, there's memes on Facebook about like jokes about, you know, I'm a church greeter. I'm here to ruin an introvert's day. And so I can understand that part of it too, right? Like there are people who's like, oh, like the dread. But the majority of people, I always say the majority of people do want to be seen and heard. And even if you think you're an introvert and don't want to be, at the end of the day, you do. And, you know, again, it's just knowing boundaries and knowing, respecting them, which is why we pay attention to that. People do want to be seen and heard.
Yeah. I think that's good too, because you probably experienced this too, but like I've been to a lot of churches, and anytime I go to a new church, I just like pretend that I'm not a church person because I'm curious to see what their welcoming is like and their systems are like. And yeah, sometimes it's like it swings so far one way where I'm like, I feel like I'm so gung-ho and I'm struggling to find out how to get connected or how to be here. Or the other way where it's like, oh, now I'm like, I feel like I have to give you my information or I have to talk to you before I leave, right? So like, yeah, finding that middle ground can be very difficult, especially with so many types of people. But
I love going to other churches and, just pretending like I'm a total newbie, and then I end up going to their welcome center and chatting with them. And yeah, it's always really interesting.
One time I did that when we were in Atlanta, and then the one church we went to had really great welcoming. So like immediately they were like, oh, you're a young adult. And they grabbed one of their young adult leaders and he's like, you can sit with me. And he like followed me on Instagram. And then the next week I was gone. Like I wasn't in Atlanta anymore, but then he hit me up the next week and was like, oh, we're having this event or whatever. And I had to be like, hey, so
I live in Canada.
I'm in Canada.
I will not be flying down for this event.
You did a really good job.
As we kind of close off, we've been talking about hospitality in this series and through these podcasts. How might we practice hospitality and welcome people in our everyday lives? And like what insight can you give as someone who's kind of in it a lot of the time and has kind of spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that well?
Yeah, no, great question. Be intentional about hospitality and welcoming. I feel like sometimes we can go through life sort of being focused on ourselves and, you know, what we need to get done in a day and that kind of thing without noticing other people. And so notice other people and just like ask God to help you notice other people. I've done that before and he will help you with that. Ask God to put people, maybe opportunities in your path, and then be obedient maybe when he nudges you.
Look for those Kairos moments.
Exactly. Exactly. Maybe it's looking for someone sitting alone in the cafe at Bethany. Or maybe it's chatting it up with someone in line at the grocery store. There we go again. I'm sure that we always have, like we probably all have stories of when someone made us feel welcome in a space that was strange or new to us. Maybe it was at, university. I have stories of that. But like those interactions really can, just make us feel welcome. And we kind of feel like a stranger, or we feel sort of new, or can put us at ease on maybe a day that we just need it. Maybe it's just been a rough day. So just look for ways that you can do that for other people. The second thing I would say is to be brave. As an introvert myself, and I think this has come through learning things. And when I first started in welcoming, I did not have the bravery, the courage that I feel like I have now. And I still am not always brave. But depending on your personality too, it can sometimes just take a lot of courage to ask that first question, to kind of put yourself out there with somebody. But I do promise you that it'll be worth it to do that. On the welcoming team, we don't like to center people out by asking, are you new? And sort of risking embarrassment when they've actually been here at Bethany for 10 years. So instead, we ask what you talked about, Andrew, like open-ended questions, or say something like, I don't believe we've met yet. I'm Suzanne. And then that can start into a great conversation. Or maybe it's just, how long have you been at Bethany? Or tell me a little bit about yourself. Or what's your story? I'd love to hear more about you. So kind of more those open-ended beginnings. Definitely don't ask, are you new? That's cringy and doesn't usually end well. Thirdly, I would say, and this is actually something in talking to one of my amazing welcoming volunteers, they brought this up a few weeks ago as we were chatting. And they just said, and I like the way they worded it, was just be curious. Be curious about other people. And maybe we've talked about this already, but ask them questions, ask them about themselves, and just truly listen. Sometimes we can always be trying to think of the next thing we're going to say, right, to the person, but listen more than you speak. This can sometimes be a challenge, but people do feel more welcome, and they feel seen and heard. There's nothing like meeting someone, and they just talk your ear off about themselves, and it goes on and on and on, and the conversation's over. It's just, people do like to share, where they're coming from, a little bit about themselves. That does help them feel seen and heard. And just lastly, I would say, understand that it doesn't have to be complicated. Often when we think about hospitality, we think, we got to clean our homes, and it sounds so overwhelming, and we have to make big elaborate meals and to have people over. And it can be that. And that can be a way of, showing others that you do care about them. However, it can be totally as simple as checking in via a text or a phone call, letting people know, you know what, I actually was just thinking about you today, and I'm praying about this in your life. Or it can be calling up a local bakery and having them deliver a box of goodies to their door with a note on it that just says, hey, I'm just thinking about you today. It can be bringing over a meal or a skip the dishes card, maybe if you don't like to cook. It can involve having people into your home and getting to know them, like I said originally. But as great as a great meal and a clean house is, it's actually really about your presence and your welcome and the relationships that are built in those spaces. I don't know if you've, maybe been invited to someone's house where it's kind of been more about the meal and, what they're giving you, and not so much their presence. It's there's a difference there. And, and you can feel it when you're sort of that person coming into that. So. Yeah.
I think that is probably a great place to end. Be intentional, be brave, and be curious. Thank you so much for being here and chatting with us. It's always again, as we joked before, every time I talk to you, I'm like, man, I gotta get into gear. This is so sweet. Doing so many cool things.
You want to join the welcoming team? I have an opening on Sunday. I actually do, though.
Normally I have some quick comeback, but I don't. So I guess I'm joining the welcoming team. For this upcoming Sunday, second and final week in hospitality, you are not speaking, correct?
No, I'm not.
So where are we going?
We actually have Sunday where we're going to have Celebrate Recovery, kind of have the entire service, and to be sharing about all that happens in their ministry and how they create belonging and safe spaces and ways for people to be connected. And it's, going to be really good. I'm excited for it. Yeah.
Next week, we also, because Mills isn't preaching, we're going to have Laura Humphreys on the podcast, which will be fun. She's our support and recovery ministry director, and she is a hoot. So I'm sure it will be
That's
wild.
a great way to describe her.
She's a lot more fun than me. Yeah.
No, my gosh. Thank you for listening, and make sure to subscribe and to like or rate this podcast on whatever podcasting app you're listening on. Make sure to send this and share this episode with someone you think would appreciate it, and we will see you on Sunday and back here next week. See you guys later.